Hello people on the internet, my name is Sarah, or as I'm known on the internet, Sketchbook Sarah, and today I'm going to be talking you through everything I know about acrylics. And I have been using acrylic paints for a long time, probably since I was about 11 or so, and I'm 21 now, so that's a good solid 10 years, as well as the fact that I used to work at an art supply store, so I used to sell it and have to know all the different types of brands to sell them to customers and yada yada. But anyway, let's get into it while I talk you through everything I know while I paint this horse. So quickly about this piece, I started this painting before I left for Italy, and I intended it to be a diptych with my other horse painting that I'll put on the screen now, but it would sort of turn it into a triptych. So I have this one horse painting that I made, and then I made another horse painting, that I made another horse painting, but the idea here is I just wanted to really just do something sparkly and pretty and sort of combine the shapes of the stained glass that I was working on as well as the gemstone pattern, and just do something really fun and trippy with the sky and something inspired by my backyard. If you don't know, I have horses and cows that live on public land in my backyard. My house backs to open space, and it's the most magical thing ever, and I paint them all the time, so that's what my inspiration is. And so right away you can see that I'm starting out with a base of an underpainting, and I'm using burnt sienna. Let's talk about materials first. So let's skip the craft paint. I know it's cheap and I know it's everywhere, but spend the extra buck or couple bucks to get the nicer stuff. At least get heavy body paint. If you insist on using cheap paint, at least get heavy body paint. Don't use the liquid stuff. But there are a couple different types of acrylic paint. Personally, I like to use majority the brand Golden and Liquitex. Theirs are just professional grade, and I sell my work, so I like to use professional grade stuff. I also really like to use different mediums. You can use gloss mediums, matte mediums, retarder, which is a slowing agent. That's just the name of it, by the way. There's also fluid acrylics, which I've played with, which are basically the same sort of finish and quality and pigment as a normal heavy body acrylic, but it's just in a really watery, thin down texture. But like I said, the paint is just still as opaque, so I like using those as well. They're a bit pricier, but if you'd really want to keep your paints nice and usable, that's a great thing to do. I like to keep my paints wet when I work, so you're going to want to get a spray bottle and just go down to Dollar Tree. I don't really use palette knives unless I'm using a technique for it. In general, I just use cheaper brushes. I like the ones by Princeton. Princeton makes some really nice brushes for cheap. They come in different packs, and I like to use different smaller brushes. A tip when you're painting is always use a bigger brush than you think you need at first, and only switch to the smallest brush when you really cannot use a bigger brush. And I like to not take care of my brushes, and I like to scrub at my paintings, which we'll talk about later. But as well as that, I also don't take care of them, and I let them sit in paint water for days and days and weeks on end. And because of that, they get really damaged. However, you can get some different effects with damaged brushes, so I keep them anyway. So if you don't know, your teachers in primary school lied to you, and red, yellow, and blue are not the primary colors. It is in fact cyan, yellow, and magenta are the real primary colors. So keep that in mind when you're picking out colors. I personally like to use a warm and a cool version, at least, of all of the colors on my palette. So I like to use, for example, white, a cool yellow, which would be a lemon yellow, a warm yellow, which would be a cadmium yellow. I also like to use different neon pigments, but I'll talk about that later. A cool red. I don't really overly use a warm red. They're kind of unnecessary. A cool blue. I use Prussian blue. This is important. Ultramarine blue to me kind of sucks. However, it's kind of the only color that looks like that, so I do still use it, but I definitely use it in combination with different colors like phthalo blue or Prussian blue. That's big, for me at least. And I use burnt sienna. Sometimes I use black, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I use raw umber, and I usually use a pink color, so that usually is fluorescent magenta by Golden is my absolute favorite pink of all time, but I'll use kind of whatever different colored pink. I think when you're starting out with acrylics, it can be really helpful to use a limited palette and sort of paring down and limiting yourself so that way you can get a better handle on value. Because if you didn't know, color theory is definitely important for mood and realism, but at the end of the day, your value is going to be what absolutely matters. You can kind of make your colors whatever you want. As long as the values are accurate to life, it will look good. So keeping that in mind, a lot of people get really carried away because painting is something where you have to juggle both at once, and they ended up getting carried away with the color and not really focusing on the actual value underlying the color. So when starting out, it can be more helpful to start with a more limited palette, so that way you don't have every color option on the planet Earth. However, I really like the sort of psychedelic rainbow vibrant style that I have, and people ask me all the time, how do you make your acrylics look like that? And how are they so vibrant? How do you get those colors? And the way I like to do it is one, doing a ton of layering and glazing. So glazing is a technique usually in oil paint where you take really thin down layers of paint and then you wash it on top of paint underneath, so that way you can see the layers that are darker underneath through the layer on top. And you can do this through a variety of methods with acrylics. So one is to just water down your paint. I'll do this. It is kind of bad practice if you break it down super thin. It can kind of break the binding and your paint sort of won't hold up completely well over time. However, it's acrylic paint, like it's plastic. I feel like I really do water it down really pretty wet. I mean, I'm not using it like a watercolor, but sometimes I do. But I am doing something, when I'm doing something like that, I just really work in really thin layers, and I just sort of use it as like a wash. But you know, do what you want. Like I said, it's plastic, so I've not really had any issues. This is just my advice, and I personally do like to paint really thin. That's sort of a comment that I get a lot, especially from my professors, is that I paint really thin. Honestly, I've gotten thicker over the years, but painting really thin does two things. One, it allows me to build up transparent layers, and that can add a more depth like quality that oil paint tends to have, and that's where glazing, that's where that comes in. And another reason I like to paint thin is that when you're glazing with thinner colors like yellows, you can get really vibrant washes and really vibrant glazes that, you don't even have to water down your paint. You can just use like a really transparent paint, and one of those transparent paints that I really like to use is neon paints or fluorescent paints. So you probably heard me talk about this before if you ever listened to me talk about my painting process, but I absolutely love using acrylic, neon, and fluorescent pigments when I'm mixing and when I'm layering. I very rarely use like a pure fluorescent pigment unless I'm doing like an underpainting, but I think that people who use them like don't know how to use them well, and they can just be a really great way to like really punch up a color. Like fluorescent yellow is such a great thing to put on top of highlights, because if you don't know, pure white highlights can sort of dull out a piece and sort of take away some of the punch and the saturation of all the other colors, because it can kind of suck up the air in the room just a little bit. Same with like pure black. Like if you're looking at this painting here, you can see I'm painting like a dark black horse, but I'm using a lot of reds and browns and that sort of Prussian blue I was talking about. When I am painting, I really do like to change up the hue variation a lot. I do that, like I said, through glazing, but also just while I'm painting. Acrylic paint dries really quickly, so you're having to remix your colors quite often, and I like that look. I think that adding different specks and different hues next to each other can create this really pretty sort of vibrating effect with the colors, and they all harmonize at a distance. Paint pens are my absolute secret weapon, okay? They're so underrated for acrylic painting. I think they're beautiful, and you can really get some amazing effects with them that I find are really hard to achieve with just regular acrylic paint. So paint pens, inside them have these really like viscous fluid acrylic paint that's super saturated, usually super opaque as well, and they dry this like very flat matte. And to me, this ends up looking like very digital a lot of times, and you can go back and add gloss medium over top of it. But the way I like to do it is drawing. So there's a lot of different things in painting that I find really hard to get with a brush. If I want to make like a really thin, delicate line that I sort of want to all be the same thickness, or if I want like a really crisp edge or just a really fine detail, sometimes just things are just easier to draw rather than paint. So paint pens are really great for that. So what I can do is I can draw a base down, and then I could shade over top of it with acrylics, or I could do another thing where I could just transfer the paint from the pens onto my brush and then paint with the paint that's in the paint pen on my paintbrush. Take a shot every time I say acrylic or paint. And there's just a really versatile medium, and I just feel like they're very underused. I feel like more people could definitely benefit from putting them in their toolkit. As well as like there's just a lot of colors that I can't really find in acrylics that come in paint pens. So I collect them. I use Posca, as well as just sort of random brands I get on Amazon, because I feel like they're really expensive. They do explode a lot, so be careful with that. One note about acrylic paint is that the more you mix different colors, the less saturated that color will be. So you can use this to your advantage when you want to make like really pretty vibrant grays when you're maybe painting something that's less colorful. If you want to infuse color into that, this is a great thing. So you can just mix a bunch of different colors and come up with some really different, really interesting colors in the mid-tone range. But if you're wanting to paint something really saturated, like the sky for example back here, I didn't elect to mix this color. I used a straight out of the tube bright neon teal color straight out of the tube. It just retains its vibrancy so much more because when pigments mix with each other, your eye just has to do more work to decode what the color is, and that's what happens. It's like science or something, I don't know. I've had it explained to me by painting teachers. So a lot of like old school painting professors will like warn you against using pure color from the tube, but I think that as long as you're avoiding local color, that's really what the heart of that issue is to me. So if you don't know, local color is the color that things are expected to be. Like a tree is green with a brown trunk, or the sky is blue. However, you know, you go outside, maybe the tree isn't green, maybe it's, I don't know, a mix of a million different colors, or the sky is purple, or the sky is light blue and not bright blue, you know, whatever, you get the point. But yeah, local color will sort of nail your piece down, but nuanced color can be straight out of the tube, you know, real life can be very saturated sometimes, and just using discretion and just sort of knowing when to pull your punches and when to really go in for impact is important. Something that's kind of good about working in Colorado because of the humidity is that things dry so quickly. You have to remix your paint constantly, but because of this you have a lot of really pretty colors and color variation because you're just constantly remixing the paint. So just sort of varying your hue every once in a while just a little bit can really add some visual interest in some different areas. There's a tip that there is more visual interest in highlight areas rather than shadows, so just keep in mind when you're simplify in the shadows rather than the highlighted areas. Some common mistakes I see people do are just not having the right consistency. You want to have like a viscous consistency where you can spread the paint around the canvas, but you don't want it too watered down where it's too thin and you break the bind, and you don't want it too thick where it's like getting chunky and like drying on you. So you want to just always really make a good consistency, and that will not only just make your painting look better, but I feel like it'll also really speed up the painting process. Not finishing the sides of the canvas. If you're gonna go through the trouble of making a beautiful piece of artwork, finish the sides of the canvas, do all the stuff. I really think that that really makes the piece stand out. If it's unfinished and you want to go sell it and you know the sides are white, like that looks unprofessional, just go ahead, take the extra step. I do it when I'm doing the under paintings, that way I can just, you know, forget about it and have it done before I'm moving on with the piece. Another tip, I found that, okay, this is not the most environmentally friendly tip, okay, so don't do what I do, but this is also really helpful. I really like these gray paper palettes instead of like plastic palettes or wood palettes, kind of any other palette, because acrylic is annoying. And what this is, it's basically like gray parchment paper, and you just put all your paint there, and then you, once it dries, you can just get a new one constantly. And I just go through so much paint and so many palettes, and I'm always mixing, and it's just such a nightmare to keep track of, and it just saves me so much time to get rid of it. When you're done with the painting, you can choose to varnish it. I personally don't always choose to varnish my paintings. Sometimes I kind of like the texture difference between the paint pens, metallic colors, glitter colors, and the thickness of the paint itself. It sort of has this like 3D quality when you walk around it that I kind of like, and sometimes the gloss can flatten it. However, it's an aesthetic choice you can make. It can make the painting look brighter and more saturated, and can also protect it throughout time. I just really am not that concerned about protecting my acrylic paintings throughout time because they're freaking plastic. Like how would they not be protected? Do you know what I mean? Always keep your damaged brushes. So if you're like me and you just damage your brushes all the flippin' time because you can't stand to take care of them,
beat the devil out of it.
You want to keep those damaged brushes, but if you can fix them, there's one thing you can buy from the store which is called paint remover, and it works for oil paint and for acrylic paint, and it's brush cleaner, and it's like really strong smelling. It smells like really strong acetone or nail polish remover, so you're gonna want to open a window. It says it's non-toxic, but the smell is literally so strong, like it gives me a headache. So I don't know about that. You want to get a glass container. I repeat, do not use a plastic container. You will regret that. Use a glass container. I actually really like these glass containers that have springs in the bottom. So do that, and then you're going to want to soak your brushes in there, and if they have plastic or paint coated handles, don't have it touch that, because what this will do is it literally melts paint. It'll melt anything that's like not hair or metal, and it'll clean your brushes, and it works like magic. So you just sort of leave it in there for a while, and then you can rinse your brushes out with soap. They make a specific soap for brushes that I have, but Guys, I'm so lazy. I'm so bad at taking care of my brushes. You know what I do? Is I ruin my brushes and I buy more, and now I have like 300 brushes, and I love it, you know? Low key, like, the brushes, they can handle it. I always like crack them. Like, I have these really big fat ones, and they'll get like built up with like very thin gunk, and then I'll like get them wet again, and like since the acrylic binding is broke, like I can fix them once they're wet. I just like sort of crack them and abuse them. So someone call CPS on my brushes. Anyway, so to get like smooth gradients when you're actually painting yourself, you're just gonna want to use your damaged brushes that you do not take care of. Like, it's so bad. You're gonna want to take those and you're gonna want to absolutely smash them like you're like mopping a really dirty floor that's never been cleaned. And if you do that and you do that in enough layers, you're going to get some really nice smooth gradients. And it's not going to take that long because you're not taking oil paint and it dries instantly. I would also say letting paint dry is a pretty good important step, but also knowing when to not let paint dry is also very important. So I feel like people will like end up with these really gross looking muddy paintings because they just don't let paint dry when it needs to dry. But on the same time, you can really take advantage of a lot of really cool effects if you know when to paint wet into wet. I really think of John Singer Sargent. He has these really effortless paintings. If you study them and analyze them, they're like really hard to achieve because he's like layered 3 paint splotches underneath the brushstroke he lays on top. So the brushstroke that he lays on top looks really effortless, really precise, and just captures the form beautifully. But it looks like it's all done in one go. But if you look at it and analyze it, you'll notice that there actually is work underneath that. So, similar thing. A lot of stuff from this paint can also be applied to oil paint. However, I just use oil paint every once in a while. I use it more at school, so I'll probably be using it a lot more. I do like using more acrylics at home. It just feels more manageable when I'm in my studio. I have a really small bedroom because I have a really big bed and a really big desk, so I have no room that's not on my bed or my desk. Anyway, that's enough rambling. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you found it educational. People have been asking me to give more artistic tips. My name is Sarah, or Sketchbook Sarah as I'm known on the internet, and I am at Sketchbook Sarah on every social media platform practically. So you can go and follow me there. If you'd like prints of some of my work, I have it listed on my Etsy store. If I have a print on there, or I have a artwork that's not listed as a print that you want a print of, let me know and I will put it up as a print. My store, I just kind of run by people telling me what they want and then I put it up because that's just easiest for me. Have a great day. Okay, bye.